Shanine Harris, and welcome to Poetry Unchained, where we explore and reintroduce you to all the wonderful and dynamic aspects of poetry. A lot of times when people think of poetry, they tend to think of ancient poets like Shakespeare, or maybe even Frost, or maybe some of the more contemporary poets like Dobbins or Patricia Smith. Today, I'd like to move us forward and think about our future of poetry. Our first guest is a junior at Akron Digital Academy, and his name is Shawande. Shawande, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure, my pleasure.
Shawande, tell us a little bit about yourself before we go into the poetry.
So, the thing about Shawande is more so how I'm more of an outlier in more scenes and more settings, and I love to read mostly, so that's where I always get my articulation in the big words. So the thing is, a lot of people don't seem to understand that there's more of a culture behind the things I do. So, like my dreadlocks, for example, I'm a Rasta, you know what I'm saying? I listen to the reggae music, but I don't like the whole stigma behind the whole Rasta of Bob Marley, smoking weed all day, being a bum, really. And they don't understand that it's more so about chaining down the chains of oppression and understanding that Bob Marley was more of a militant man, a revolutionary, and an activist. So people don't know about how he would stand out on his house, you know what I'm saying? He had millions of dollars, and he would give that away to the people to let them start off their lives. And most people don't know that about him.
So let me ask you this. You mentioned a couple of things.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that you are a reader, that you
Yes.
love to read. You also mentioned that you love the reggae culture.
Yes.
And you mentioned Bob Marley. I guess the question I would have for you is, how do you then, well first, what types of things do you like to read? Let's start there.
I like things like more so African-based, Africanized, you know what I'm saying? Because I have more of an Afrocentric view. So the things that are centered around Africa is where I find my influence, more so. So as far as things of reading, I like The Hajj from Leon Uris, you know what I'm saying? And I like things of James Baldwin, he's a great author. And I like to read the Kebra Nagast, I like biblical readings as well. So I've read the Bible, I'm reading the Quran now. And those are the things that I prefer to read the most, historically accurate or biblically influenced.
So let me ask you this. It's often said that to be the best writer, you have to be a good reader. Okay, so given your depth of reading, I can only imagine what your writing may be like. So do you find that a lot of what you read then becomes incorporated in your writing, or have you kind of adopted your own style of writing?
I would say that I've definitely incorporated a lot of different things in my writing, because like I brought up Bob Marley, his forms of writing, I like to incorporate that with the reggae style. So when we normally in the band that I'm in, called Free World, we would have incorporated my poetry with reggae music as an instrumentation. So what I would do is I would sing a couple of lines and then I'd speak the rest or other lines. And everything would be on the one in a certain beat, in a different rhythm, So when I adopt things from Bob Marley or other reggae artists like Everton Blender or Barry Brown, Lee Scratch Perry, we have these things called dub, where the bass cuts out, and then I would stop what I'm saying, and everything would be driven by the drums. And then the writing style comes back when we have what's called a ragamuffin scat, where I would not exactly say words, but express myself more so.
I'm gonna have you back up, because you're using a lot of terms, and for those of us who are not musically literate, you kind of have to explain these terms to us. So one of the things you said is that you typically will do things on the one beat. I guess what is a normal beat that people would do stuff on in music? Right. 1 versus a 4, I don't know what that is.
All right. So the one beat more so would be, if I'm moving and we're singing like this, all right, and this is where the drum is. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That's where the one beat is.
Okay.
1. And everything that I do would incorporate right there and on that one. And everything that I do would be centered around that one beat. So
As opposed to
the Africans traditionally would, the people of the North, you know, the North Africans upon the Nile River, they would be on the upbeat where it would be one, and this is the down where my foot hits, you know, and they would be on the up, you know, and they would go up, off of the beat instead. So that would be more complex, but with the reggae style, everything has more of a swing to it. And with that swing, you could really dance to it, you can definitely move, and that's where it would start. It's very firm.
So when you do your poetry, particularly when you're articulating it, you do it for you try to ensure kind of rhythmic pattern to it.
Yes.
Is that what I'm hearing you saying? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So let me ask you this. Tell me a little bit about your creative process, because I know that you read a lot, and I know the influences, but how do you go about actually composing a poem?
Going about composing it is actually a very strange process, you know. I play music, you know, maybe in the speakers I'll listen to Gil Scott-Heron. That's my greatest poetic influence. He got me to start singing and got me to start writing, but I'll play one of his songs and I'll listen to his piano chords and I'll see where the rhythm is going, and the words just come to me and I understand what words to use. But then I structure it where I'll have to listen to the song, then I'll get on the piano and I'll write out the chords, or I'll play the chords.
So for you, the music inspires the poetry.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there ever a case where the poetry just stands on its own without the music, or are you pretty much it's the music that inspires you?
It goes both ways. There are times where I don't need the music, where I see the world in poetry, in poetic justice mostly. And with this view, I can go out and I'll be out in regular society, sitting wherever, and I'll see something, and I'm like, wow, I can really write a poem to that, or I'll see it, and I'm like, that is a poetic movement. Or I'll see certain people walking, and one of my poems actually is called Greetings, Black Sambo. And what I saw was there was these two black men. They were probably in high school, and they're hanging out with all these white women. And the thing is, they were literally just providing as entertainment for these white women outside of Chipotle. And I just kind of watched them as they joined this buffoonery act, you know. They were just being fools, and these white women just ate it up, and as they would praise them, they would just love it. And so I saw that, and I just knew that there was a poem in it that I had to write about.
So, okay, so given what you've just told me, would you then say that you try to use your poetry to maybe make a political statement or a social statement even?
A lot of times I do. Not just the poetry, even the songs I write, you know. I'd never truly just write about anything other than the political injustices going around. I like to write about the social injustice, and anything that I've written about myself is also about those injustices happening to me. And
that's interesting. And the reason I bring that up, you know, in some of the studies I've been doing, one of the questions that comes up often is that, is a poet politically responsible? Should they be politically responsible?
I think...
Yeah, I want to ask you that question.
I believe that it depends on this person's, or this poet's, way of writing and what he writes about. You know, if there's a poet and he just writes about the things he sees and the scenery that he sees, I don't think he's as politically responsible as a poet who writes about the injustices going around. So if I were to write about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, if I were to write about this, you know, if politics and those two, I would be more responsible than someone else writing about what they saw while walking down the street.
So there's not an inherent political responsibility. You're saying it's based on the themes that you write on.
Yes.
So you kind of, if you're not writing on those themes, then you're pretty much given a pass, I guess, for political responsibility.
Yeah, more so, I would say so.
Interesting.
Because not everyone's politically inclined and not everyone's thinking so deeply. So there's always going to be those set people who are going to see these different injustices and want to do something about it. And then there are also other people, as artistic as they are, see it and do nothing. And those people, I would say, it's wrong for them to do nothing if you see it. But I'm not going to ask everyone to just jump onto that wagon and start fighting, because not everyone is a revolutionary at heart.
Interesting. So let me get this straight then. Your poetry does deal with social and political issues. Do you think that it can, and when I think of revolution, I think of change. Let me just say that. I think some people hear the word revolution and they get scared.
Right.
Okay. Is that one of the goals of your poetry, to invoke, and I'm going to, just because we don't want to send everybody in uproar, I'm going to say invoke a change?
I would most definitely want to invoke a change. That's what the goal is. But as far as revolution goes, that can be a very iffy word to people, like you said. But the thing is, when I say revolution, I do mean invoke change. But I also, idolized Malcolm X. Al-Haj Malik al-Shabazz was his name. And he says self-defense by any means necessary. And I firmly and strongly believe that is true. So in my poems, I want to have someone understand that. And I'm not saying go out and start fighting and burn your streets down. I'm saying that when you see something happening, you have to do something about it to some degree, because not doing anything is just as bad as doing it yourself.
So do you believe then that your poetry, do you believe you should be held accountable for people's response to your poetry? Because that's a very iffy line, right? The minute you say that, and I agree, Malcolm X, a great leader,
right.
So we've had, keep in mind, revolutionary doesn't mean bad, right?
Right.
So when I think about someone like Malcolm X, even he said at some point there's an accountability that has to happen. So if you are saying that, by any means necessary, things like that, there's an accountability that you now invoke. Do you believe that beyond making political statements, then that maybe a writer is also responsible for people's reaction to their work?
I do believe that you can hold the leaders accountable, because things can be, or more so, there's a difference between translation and more interpretation. So people can interpret what I say as violent or angry, or being an angry black man, but that's not who I am. So when I say things like chant down the chains of Babylon, people can hear that and want to go out and really burn something. I'm responsible for that because I've influenced that person to do that. But then there are also other people who hear it and go for more of a non-violent approach, and I'm responsible for that as well because I've influenced that person to do that. So of course I would say you can hold us accountable.
Swande, you are, first of all, I'm amazed at your level of awareness, socially and politically. I'm just amazed also at the diverse influences that you have in your poetry. I guess the next question I have before we actually get to hearing some of your poetry, which I'm sure everyone wants to, is knowing, given all of this, how do you avoid, I guess, some of the confinements of mainstream poetry and rules and societal rules? Because there are some that says, hey, these are some of the things that truly make poetry. There are some that may look at what you're saying, what you do, and say, that's not poetry. Yeah. It's not, it may have a purpose somewhere, but it's not really poetry, meaning I wouldn't put it in a poetry journal or something like that. What do you say to those type of I guess, criteria and stigmas in writing?
Well, a big part of being that outlier is understanding that I don't really fit into a stigma, so I don't try. And I understand that if someone comes and offers me a lot of money, there's going to be an agenda behind it. So what I would do is everything needs to be put in writing. The deal needs to be put in writing. The agreement needs to be put in writing.
Even beyond that, I think just socially or just for your own moral compass, do you believe that there's ever a moment of trade-off in your message for, I guess, the societal standard?
The societal standard will always put me in a difficult position, and I understand that. So I'm not going to allow myself in any ways to fit into that. And no matter what happens, even if it means I don't get famous or rich, that's not the goal. So I don't mind not getting to that point.
That sounds like then that you actually do poetry because one, you do want to invoke change, and two, because you love
Yes.
the poetry. Having said that, I want to give everyone else a chance here to see your interpretation of everything you've told us through your poetry. So would you be willing to share something with us?
Oh yes, of course, of course. So this is a very short poem. This is a poem I wrote about 6 months ago. This is called My Life in Between. And the whole influence of this poem was the fact that being an outlier, I learned that I was too African for American black people, and I was too black for American white people, or any white people for that matter. So when I was writing this poem, that was the whole influence of it. So, my life in between does not mean that I am a nobody. The fact that I don't fit in does not make me want to be a somebody. In fact, I don't want to be one of you. I don't want to be the man that shaves his head and goes outside and acts like it's all fine. I don't want to be the buffoon that likes to hang out with white people and sips on wine while watching other people hurt themselves. I'm not that kind of person. So, what does it truly mean to be right in the middle? Being musically oriented and not much of anyone else, not much of a riddle or an enigma. That's who I am. You don't understand me. And I don't understand you, nor do I want to. You tell me to shave my locks because it's nappy. Well, for me, it makes me happy. You think that because I don't shave my beard or even comb it out, that I would be a bum. That's not who I am. Now, that poem mostly doesn't exactly rhyme too much, and that's, I've spoken to people about that, and people have asked me questions about it, but I don't care, because those stigmas and the rules, they don't always apply. And as long as my message is set across, then it makes sense to me. Hopefully it makes sense to other people. And I only want to really affect those who understand what it's like to be in a position where you don't make sense to others.
Interesting. I will say this for the rhyming. We are in an age of poetry where actually the rhyming poem is, I don't want to call it archaic, but it's not the norm. The free form poem is becoming this century's standard of poetry.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you are right on key with what the world is saying, hey, this is real poetry, because it is free form, it's not restricted by the rhyme. So I commend you and say, hey, you're not restricted to the rhyme. But then again, you never were, because you were never one who fit in a box. So Shawande, I just want to thank you for being here with us, sharing very candidly the source of your poetry, the inspiration of your poetry, and then sharing your poetry directly with us. I know we're going to hear more from you in the future, and I look forward to it, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Hi, you've been watching Poetry Unchained. I'm your host, Janine Harris. We've already heard from Shawande from Akron Digital Academy. He shared with us his love of poetry and how it's inspired by both music and the things around him. I don't think anybody would question that music plays an important part and impacts poetry. But the one thing that's often overlooked is the impact that art has on poetry and vice versa. It has been said that the collaboration between poetry and art facilitates conversation. So today, we're going to continue our conversation here at Emmanuel Christian Academy, where students have been working on various partnerships in art and poetry. Our first guest is Tony. Tony, hi.
Hello.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. So you're a student here at Emmanuel. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What grade are you in?
I'm in 6th grade, going to 7th grade.
Okay. What do you like most about being here at Emmanuel Christian Academy?
I just like the people being here because it makes the school.
It makes the school wonderful. So Tony, on this wall there are some pieces of art and some drawings. Which ones are yours?
My pieces of art is this one, and this one.
It was very lovely. Before we talk about your drawings, because you seem to be very talented, do you have a favorite artist or poet?
My favorite artist is my mother, Dara Harper, and my grandmother, Diane Johnson.
If I'm correct, your mother and your grandmother are both notable artists here in the city of Akron. They are native artists here, is that correct?
Correct.
So tell me a little bit, so you pretty much have art just running through your veins. So let's talk a little bit about your drawings. There are 3 of them. We'll kind of start at the bottom here. The one at the bottom, tell me a little bit about what inspired this particular drawing.
What inspired me was what's going on around us was Black Lives Matter, and what's in this drawing is a black family just taking a picture.
So this one was inspired by things that happen in our community. What about the one up here? What's the title of this one and what inspired it?
The title, this is called Triple Trouble, and this is talking about me and my siblings, about us being triplets and us being bad when we were little.
So you said you were bad. You're not still bad, are you? Okay, I was just checking. So sometimes we've learned from the bottom one that sometimes your drawings and art can be inspired by, again, what's happening socially around us. But sometimes it's inspired by the very things that are happening in our family, such as this one, and in your case, being a triplet in your relationships. What about the last one over here?
This one is the yearbook cover art for last year's school year.
So let me ask you a question. When you sit down to draw, is there any particular process that you go through or a certain place that you like to be when you draw?
Oh, I really draw at school, but I prefer drawing at home. It's more quiet.
It's more quiet. Where do you get your inspiration from? I know this one, outside of, if you're at home, because this was done at Black Lives Matter Social, this was your family and that was a school, but when you're at home in your room, what are some of the other things that you draw on for inspiration?
I don't know, it just comes to my mind, I draw it.
So that means you're just a natural artist? Thank you. You are very talented, and I'm sure just like we've seen so much with your mother and your grandmother, we will see a lot more from you in the coming future. Tony, thank you for joining us, and it was my pleasure to talk with you. I want to thank Tony for sharing with us her artwork. She showed us artwork that is inspired by the social things that happen around us, by the families that we have, and also by the friends that we keep. Our next guest is Sherelle. Sherelle is also... Shariel, thank you. Shariel is also a student at Emmanuel Christian Academy. Shariel, welcome. Shariel, what grade are you in here at Emmanuel?
Currently I'm in the 7th grade, but I'm moving on to the 8th grade.
Okay, now will you also be doing the 8th grade here at Emmanuel Christian Academy?
Yes, ma'am.
So how do you like it here? What's your favorite thing about Emmanuel?
I like Emmanuel because you can be a regular student, but also you can worship who you want to worship and be who you want to be.
That's awesome. Speaking of things like worship and doing and being who you want to be, one of the things you've done is an art piece here in, this is called abstract art, correct?
Correct.
What inspired you to do this piece?
Well, my teacher, Dara Harper, she pushed me to be and to know that I could do what I could do. Because at first I had doubt and I thought that I couldn't do it, but she pushed me and told me that I could do it, so she inspired me.
Let's back up. What is the name of this piece?
It's called The Work of Life.
The Work of Life. I guess because I always have a hard time, I'm a poet, and I have a hard time coming up with titles. How did you come up with the title, The Work of Life, based on this particular art piece?
I also had a little bit of trouble trying to find a title also. So I thought about different things and tried to connect them, and I thought about life and mistakes because everybody tells me you have to make mistakes to learn. So in my art, I made a couple of mistakes right here, but I used chalk to go over it, and that's basically how I got my title.
So we know that Dara, we've already talked about her accomplishments as an artist. Are there other artists or poets that you consider to be some of your favorite?
Yeah, I love Maya Angelou.
She's one of my favorites too. Let me ask you this question. We're doing a collaboration right now on art and poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the art piece here, but it's also my understanding that you actually created a poem based off of the artwork.
Yes.
So would you be willing to share your poem with us, excuse me?
Mm-hmm. The Work of Life. Life is long but short, hard but easy, and painful but delightful. Life is full of mistakes, full of doubt, and full of uncertainty. But you have to make mistakes. During life you must overcome. You must also have confidence in yourself and what you do. Life will try to break you and shake you, but put up with it. People in your life may be very intimidating. People in your life may also be encouraging. However, you have to only be thyself. The feeling and dealing of life will try to grow on you like fungi, will try to make you fit the generations, but every day is only a second of a millisecond memory in this short but long lifespan. Live to your fullest potential. Always love yourself and work hard no matter what. Lastly, always work on your life. Don't let life work on you.
Very wise words for such a young lady. Let me ask you a question. Was it easier to express yourself through art or through the written word?
I think it was easier to do both. I think they were kind of the same, because when I paint, I love painting because you just flow with the brush. You just let everything go, and that's the same with poetry. You can write what you want to write and make up words and be silly and do what you want to do. Nobody can change it.
So another question for you, because I'm very intrigued by what you've done here. Do you feel now that you've written your poem and now that you look back at your artwork, do you feel that you have a different meaning or more meaning, or do you feel like they just kind of balance each other out at this point?
I think it's more meaningful now, because if you actually think about the words and apply them to the picture, you can see more, like your eyes are open.
What about the creative process that went into this? I know that this was an assignment originally from your art teacher, but when you're trying to create art, you're trying to create poetry, how do you do that? What's your creative process like?
Well, I start off basically with a structure, because you have to have something strong to hold what you are going to do. You have to hold it. And then I basically went over different things and added different colors and thought about different things. And I did the dripping process, and then I added chalk and kept painting over and different things like that.
What about with the poetry? Was that also a repetitive process for you, or just kind of adding and taking away things?
Yes. I used different words because I didn't like using the same words over and over. So I changed the words, like break and shake, also intimidating and encouraging, and thyself. And I just played around with different things.
Wow. You know, I can only imagine there are going to be so many great things in store for you. If this is any indication of what's to come. Shariel, I want to thank you for joining us.
Mm-hmm.
I look forward to hearing much more from you in poetry, and also seeing so much more from you in artwork. I wish you all the best, and I want to thank you for joining us here in Poetry Today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank our guests, Tony and Shariel, for joining us today. You know, art and music are ways of having a voice and a way of having expression. And if it is true that art facilitates conversation, then poetry is the medium by which we keep relationships. So always remember, poetry is the language of relationships. Be good to yourself and to others. I'm Shanine Harris, and you've been watching Poetry Unchained. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.